and welcome to God Calling Vocation Vibes, Conversations with the Little Sisters of the Poor. I'm Sister Carolyn, and today we have with us Mother Julie, who serves as provincial in our Chicago province, and we are going to talk about the very pressing topic of care of creation, but we're going to talk about it in the context of consecrated religious life, the vowed life. Mother Julie, could you please tell those who have joined us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be a consecrated religious sister and a little sister of the poor?
Sure. I was born in Lexington, Kentucky, and raised there and lived there until I went to college. I went away to Boston, Massachusetts for college, and it was there that I really discovered my vocation and I first encountered the Little Sisters. Of course, my story has a lot more to it than that, but when I was in Boston, I was a junior in college, and I was reading a book of quotations by Mother Teresa of Calcutta. I already wanted to work with the elderly, but I wanted to do it to kind of save the world, go into public health and make the world a better place for them. And when I was reading the book about Mother Teresa, I felt the Lord saying to me, this is how I want you to work with my elders. This is what I want you to do. Not something big and beautiful, but very simple, day to day, one-on-one, affecting one life at a time. And I already knew of the Little Sisters and that they had a home in the town where I was going to school. So I called up and went over and started volunteering, and the rest is history. But it was through that class in college that God spoke to me.
Praise God. See, he has all different ways of speaking to the hearts of the young men and women out there. So thank you, Mother Julie. And our topic, as I mentioned, is care of creation in the context of the vowed religious life. But you will hear the term evangelical counsels, which refers to chastity, poverty, and obedience, the three vows that religious sisters and brothers and priests typically take. We have an additional vow of hospitality, but those three evangelical counsels are what position us uniquely to enter into the spirit and the practice of care of creation. And so, Mother Julie, would you please share with us?
So I remember when I was in college, a little sister I knew went to give a talk, and she asked me to read it over to see if it would really relate to young people. And she kept using this phrase, evangelical counsels. And so I gave the talk back to her. I said, it's very nice, but what do you mean by evangelical counsels? Because that, I think most of us, all we are familiar with is the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And what we don't realize is that the evangelical counsels are for everyone, because they are gospel counsels for living our life. Consecrated religious vow themselves to live according to these counsels, but they really are for everyone. Whereas a precept of Jesus is a command, like love your neighbor as yourself. That's a command of Jesus. When Jesus tells the rich young man, go sell everything you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, that's a counsel. He doesn't ask all of us to go and sell everything that we have, but he does ask us to live in right relation to the things that we have, whether we are consecrated religious or lay people or priests or bishops or whoever we are. And so just to start by saying that, because I think that term evangelical counsels, it sounds very beautiful, but very vague. So I hope that helps to explain a little more what we are referring to. And as Sister Carolyn, as you said, we're going to talk about how we live those three counsels in a vowed way in our religious life in relation to care for creation, which, as I prepared for this, it was a wonderful path of discovery for me to see how much that is really integrated into our life without us even thinking about it, I think. Yeah. So as I mentioned, and as Sister Carolyn said, the three counsels that religious vow themselves to live are chastity, poverty, and obedience. And those things might seem pretty specific at first glance, but the reason those are the three that we vow is because as you look at them and delve into what it really means to live those counsels, you realize it encompasses the whole of our life. And that's what I hope we can bring out a little bit today. So, for example, chastity, it's not just about living celibately, but it's about living in right relation. And there's a very good book, not necessarily so easy to read, but it's very good, by Bishop Erik Varden of Trondheim, Norway. He is a Trappist, and so he wrote this book about chastity, and it's called Chastity: Reconciliation of the Senses. And that's because our senses, our natural physical senses, take in stimuli, and we respond to those stimuli we take in. And so we can respond in a chaste way, or we can respond in a selfish way. And the stimuli create desires within us. And so the virtue of chastity is what helps to point those desires in the right direction. Now, in our constitutions, I'm going to read here a little bit. One of the articles about chastity explains, chastity lived in faith frees us from selfishness, increases our power of loving, and far from being an obstacle to the fulfillment of our true personality, allows it to flourish by teaching us what it means to love God for himself alone and others with God's love. So I think this phrase, even though it's part of our rule of life, it can be lived by any person. And we are called to follow it in a particular way as little sisters. So chastity frees us from selfishness. And as we go through this article, we'll break it down, and I'm going to try to show how the different pieces relate to the care for creation, how this leads us into living in a spirit of care for creation. So when I engage with others, is it because I want to get something from them? Because I want them to fill some kind of hole that's within myself? When I make purchases, do I consider how the things are made, where they are made, what might have gone into how they're made, what they're made of? Or do I just look for what I think is going to be best for me? What's going to, whatever that might be. And do I consider the materials that have been used? I read a story recently in from the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, and it probably sounds very far from religious life, but I found it very interesting. It's about what goes into making some of the most expensive perfumes from around the world. And one ingredient they often use is jasmine, which, as anybody who's ever been near a jasmine plant knows, smells beautiful. But the jasmine that they use often comes from low-income countries, and it's picked by people who are paid very poorly. So this piece by the BBC was bringing out how the jasmine pickers, because they are paid so poorly, they are having to bring their children with them to pick so that they can pick enough in order to make enough money to survive. And so it told the story of this one woman who gets up at 3 o'clock every morning, because you have to get out and pick the jasmine before the sun comes up and starts to wilt the flowers. She would get up at 3 o'clock every morning, get her 4 children up, and they would be out until sunrise, picking jasmine in the dark together. And so it just gives us a sense of how our choices, we're not going to be going out and buying luxury perfumes, but, even in our life, the choices we make, we need to take into consideration where things are coming from, what's going into them, how that affects the world around us and the people involved in the production of those items. Now, our constitutions also say chastity increases our power of loving. So again, because I'm not looking to take everything I can get. That's what chastity keeps us from doing. I'm looking, it opens me up to receive from others and to seek their good rather than my own. So it makes me more open to other people and places that might have nothing to do with me, like those jasmine pickers. And as little sisters, we kind of get a head start on this because we are an international congregation. And so what happens in New Caledonia matters to us. What happens in Benin, in Africa, matters to us because we have little sisters living in those places. We have residents in those places we're caring for. We have people we're working with side by side. And so it matters to us. And that can help us reflect on our own impact that we have on the environment and how that might be impacting the people we love on the other side of the world. But it also comes much closer to home, even here in the US, because our home in Gallup, New Mexico is at the edge of the Navajo reservation. And this is an area that suffers from drought and desertification of the land. And so our little sisters there, in an effort to support the people they live near and not take advantage of the resources that are in that place, have partnered with a farm in the area and set up a system of rainwater harvesting from the gutters of our home, so that rather than the rain just running into the land and not really serving any purpose in the dirt around the house, we can collect it, we share it with the farm, and both places we use that water to help in a productive way, if you will. They can use it for watering their plants, watering their animals. We use it to help develop a little garden there at the home so that our residents have the joy of going out and gardening and seeing the plants and the vegetables and everything else grow. So this is the way that chastity, because it increases our power of loving, it's keeping us from focusing on ourselves and opening us up to others around us. And finally, chastity allows our true personality to flourish by teaching us what it means to love God for himself alone and others with God's love. So again, since living chastely turns us away from loving people and things only in relation to how they impact me or might be good for me, I can also learn to love God, not for what he can give me or what he can do for me, but because he is who he is and he loves me. And in theological discussions, it's often said that Jesus lived for others. Jesus was a man who lived for others. So for us as consecrated persons who seek to follow Christ, we learn to do the same, to live for others. And, this can happen in very simple ways, obvious ways, like in our homes, trying to cook in the kitchens according to the portions needed so as to reduce food waste. In general, in life, it can happen in some very unusual ways. Recently I read in this article was from CNN that there were visitors to Carlsbad Caverns recently. It was kind of just a very interesting story. At the caverns, people are only allowed to bring in water and the primary reason for that is to try to keep animals out. If there was food dropped, anything like that, it could attract animals into the caverns and that wouldn't be good for the visitors. So this group of visitors, after they left, the park rangers found someone had dropped an open bag of Cheetos. And it sounds like nothing. It sounds like somebody littering. But in the ecological framework of the caverns, it was actually kind of a big deal because the humidity of the space and the material, the corn powder that the Cheetos are made out of were just the perfect combination for different types of mold and organisms to start growing from it. And so, obviously they went in, they picked up the bag of Cheetos and took it out. But then as they started looking around, there were molds and other organisms that weren't natural to the caverns that had already started to form. And so they had to go and do a cleaning to try to get those out. And it sounds like something so far removed from our daily existence, but I think it's just an example of how we don't even realize many times how the little things we do impact the world around us. And I mean, I don't think I'll ever go visit Carlsbad Caverns, but we do have natural parks, national parks, natural places we go to visit. But even beyond that, in our daily life, these little things, if we're not thinking of others before ourselves, can really have an impact on their life.
Truly it can. And thank you for those wonderful insights. I love what you said about, since I'm no longer focused on myself in the evangelical practice of chastity, since I'm no longer focused on myself, I'm more open to those people and places which seemingly have nothing to do with me. And of course, our little sisters in New Caledonia are really in want, and there's a great unrest in the area. They cannot get what they need for their residents and themselves, and yet those kinds of things don't really make the world news much. But through our evangelical counsel and vow of chastity, we care about all of those people and situations, whether we know about them or not. This is God Calling Vocation Vibes. I'm Sister Carolyn, and I have with me Mother Julie, who is the Provincial Superior of our Chicago province, talking about the very important topic of care of creation, and that is with respect to the evangelical counsels that are lived in religious life. And so now, Mother, could you please tell us some more about that topic, and specifically poverty and obedience?
Okay. So again, the virtue of poverty, at first glance, it seems to talk just about what we have, what we possess, the material things we possess. But in fact, it also concerns what we're able to do and what we know. Because in a very real way, those things, we feel like we possess them too. And so as followers of Christ, even though we feel these things belong to us, and they do, they're gifts from God, we're called to live as stewards of them and not owners. So just because I'm able to do something doesn't mean I should do it. Or just because I know more than the person next to me doesn't make me any better than that person, doesn't give me some kind of an advantage over them. Just because I do have a possession at my disposition, it doesn't mean I can just do whatever I want with it. I want to do with it something that will contribute to God's plan and to the goodness of the world. So again, in our constitutions, there's many things in there that would be relevant for anyone's life, not just ours. But in the chapter on poverty, there's a section where it says, we draw from contemplation of the Son of God, poor and annihilated, the desire to resemble him, and understand that the profession of poverty is love before being renunciation. With joy, we acknowledge ourselves to be radically poor, awaiting all from him who has given us everything. And actually, this text paraphrases a saying of our mother, Jean Jugan, where she would tell the novices, it is so good to be poor, to have nothing, to depend on God for everything. So the first point I want to look at from this is that we desire to resemble the poor and annihilated Son of God, and that we do this out of love, not out of renunciation. And that's phrases put in there for a reason, because if we are doing this just to deny ourselves, because it's so good to deny ourselves and to not take anything more than I need. And I want to deny myself this, I want to deny myself that, so that I'll be a better person. We're still hampered by our fallen human nature. And after a while, that becomes very tedious, and it becomes very heavy. Whereas when we're doing it out of love, it's because it's for someone else. And it takes us out of ourselves so that because it's for someone else, it remains important. Because it's for someone else, it doesn't become tedious because it's not about me. And so we're not just living this in a spirit of human solidarity. We choose this way of life because Jesus chose it, and we've chosen to follow him. When God became man, he became man in a lower class family, and that lower class family lived the holiest of lives. So from contemplating him, we realize that it's not what we have, what we possess, what status we have in society that affects my holiness, my goodness, my worth, but about how we live. And that puts a lot of things into perspective in our lives. So kind of a funny story. When I was leaving home to become a little sister of the poor, at that time as postulants, we wore our secular clothes. And so I was going through my closet to see what I was going to take, what I didn't want to take, etc. And I realized that through the years, I had acquired a coat or a jacket for every possible weather circumstance. And, for rain, for drizzle, for snow, for whatever it might be. And I'm looking at these things and I said, oh my gosh, without even realizing it, we get drawn up into this consumerist mentality that Pope Francis loves to talk about, thinking that I need this and I need this and I need that, when actually I only need this. And it can happen so easily. So now, as a little sister, I have 2 white sweaters, 2 black sweaters, 2 heavier coats, and that's it. And that doesn't make me any better than anybody else, but that's what I need. And I don't need more than that. And I'm trying to follow Christ, who only had what he needed. And so it's okay. It's good. So even again, it's in these little things that we don't always think about. And that's what's been wonderful preparing this, because I'm like, oh my gosh, it just comes in where you don't even see it or think about it. Then again, going back to this passage from our constitutions, it speaks of the annihilated Son of God. Well, that doesn't seem like a real great thing in our world of today. Nobody wants to be, well, obviously, nobody wants to be annihilated anyway, but it's certainly not going to be thought of in our world that we live in. But the reality is that millions of people in our world are living this every day in some way or another. They are experiencing the passion of Christ in their own lives, in daily life. And for us as little sisters, again, our internationality opens up new dimensions of this for us. Because when we learn of the challenges facing our little sisters and residents in these other countries, it affects us, and in terms of climate change, the rising sea levels, these catastrophic natural events, I should say, and national events, and the desertification of the land, those have a real concrete impact on, again, people we love on the other side of the world. And so that makes us, or should make us, really reflect about what I'm doing right here, right now, to treat the world well, to contribute to a healthy environment. And on a human level, it relates to the violence that people experience in different countries. Thankfully, right now, in none of the countries that we are in is there an outright war, but there has been a lot of violence in New Caledonia lately. There is a lot of violence in some of the other countries that we're present in. And so how am I a peacemaker? I can't be a peacemaker over there, but how am I a peacemaker here? I try to unite myself spiritually to that experience by embracing the contradictions and the conflicts in my own life in that spirit of peace. And I try to unite myself materially by choices I make that either can help or destroy the environment around us. So it's, even though we aren't in a recognizable way, perhaps being annihilated, we can enter into that. And then the last part of this piece from our constitutions, it says, with joy, we acknowledge ourselves to be radically poor, awaiting all from him who has given us everything. And I would say that the last part of this phrase is what really lays the basis for us for a proper relation to creation. God has given us everything, period. Amen. We are stewards of it. So how do we live that way? This computer I'm looking at right now that I have at my disposition as the Mother Provincial, I'm going to leave behind when I'm no longer in this role. But how do I use it now so that it might still be usable for whoever would follow me? In our home in Indianapolis, there's a water source that runs under the home. We certainly don't want to do anything to contaminate that water source, because what it nourishes is so far beyond just our home. And so again, this idea of being radically poor, we realize if we see ourselves as stewards, we realize that no matter how much money we have, no matter what capacities we have, no matter how much we know, it's just gift, and we're called to use it as gift, and that frees us. I don't have to worry about living up to certain standards. I just have to use it as gift. And then I can be joyful because I'm free. Moving on to obedience. The virtue of obedience for all of us isn't just about doing what we're told, but about recognizing God's authority over my life and over all of creation. And again, all three of these counsels take us out of ourselves. So with obedience, I come to see that my life is meant to be a gift for God and for others, and that God has made me for a purpose. Living in a spirit of obedience helps me to discern what that purpose is and how to direct the gift of myself. It also helps me to respect the purpose for which God has made other people and for which he's made everything in the world. So again, going back to our constitutions, because for us, that's what we always go back to. This is our guide for how to live as little sisters. It says, our religious obedience strives to be ever more the living expression of our love for God. Enlightened and strengthened by faith, it leads us to an attitude of humble and filial abandonment and makes us adhere to all the providential dispositions of the divine will and believe in the power of his grace to overcome difficulties. So again, like with poverty, obedience is an expression of love. God has given me life and he's made me for a purpose, and I respond by seeking to live that life well and to discern that purpose and follow it. No, animals in some ways, I think, have an advantage over us because they can't live in contradiction to the purpose for which God made them. They don't have free will, and so they can't choose not to live as a frog, as a horse, as whatever it might be. But we do have free will, and so we can choose to live in a way that's not in accord with who God made us to be. Jean Chugan, again, had a saying that she would share with the novices: when you go to pray, be like a little frog before God. And I mean, it sounds very sweet, very, very cute, but really there's a profound depth to it, because a frog can only be a frog. And so when he goes, sits on his lily pad All he can do is croak and sing and praise the Lord according to how he is made as a frog. For us, on the other hand, when we go before God, we can sit wherever we are before the Lord and complain and criticize and you know, look to have something that we don't have, whatever it might be. And I'm not saying that we don't need to be open with God. We really, really do. We need to be very simple and very honest with God when we pray, but we can't let it stop there. If that simplicity, that honesty is just turning in on ourselves and only worrying about ourselves, that's not healthy. It needs to go out of ourselves and say, okay, God, this is what I'm experiencing. Help me to see where you are in this. Help me to see your plan in this. Help me to know how to live this in love. And it's not always easy, but that's part of living this spirit of obedience. It's not just about what I want to do or how I want things to be, but where are you in all of this, God? And then our constitutions say that obedience has to be enlightened and strengthened by faith. If we don't have faith, obedience becomes compliance. We're just following the rules, just ticking things off of a list. So in the light of care of creation, it touches on how we live in the world. You know, God created all things. He desires the good of all things, and he's made all things in a manner in which they can bring him glory. So the Bible, the church, they might not teach about crop rotation, and we don't even have to deal with this as little sisters, but it's a simple principle to explain it. But we want to support farmers, not just us little sisters, but Christians. We should want to support farmers in this practice because it prevents us from depleting the land so that the land can continue to serve for the purpose for which God made it. One area that does touch us as little sisters is the use of disposable items, one-use items. When we use it, we throw it away. And as Pope Francis has so often brought out, that mentality, that constant use of disposable items leads us to see other things as disposable, ultimately people. And for us as little sisters, in a particular way during the pandemic, we had to use a lot of disposable items, which we had to use. Gowns, gloves, masks, all those different things. It was hard for us because we care for people who are coming to be seen as disposable. And so the more we use these things, we throw away, throw away, throw away. It's like in contradiction to what we're trying to do in our service to the elderly. But we had to do it. It's not that we didn't do it. We had to do it, but it was hard. It wasn't always easy. And so finally, obedience leads us to an attitude of humble and filial abandonment and makes us adhere to all the providential dispositions of the divine will and believe in the power of his grace to overcome difficulties. Now, this attitude of humble and filial abandonment, it shows us again that obedience isn't just about following a set of rules, but about a relationship. Because God has made me and loves me and holds me in life, my seeking to respond and discern how he wants me to live that life is the fruit of my relationship with him. And the more I come to understand that, the more I trust him, and the more I live in this spirit of openness and abandonment to what he is preparing for me each day. Just recently, Pope Francis was in Papua New Guinea, and when he met with the children there, it was at a school for the disabled, and one of the children asked him, "Why am I not like other people?" And Pope Francis replied, I'll read it here, "I really only have one answer to this question, and that is, none of us is like anyone else, because we're all unique in God's eyes. Each one of us has a role and a mission in the world that no one else can fulfill. Even if it involves difficulties, carrying out our role and mission will also give us a great deal of joy in ways that are different for each person. As little sisters, we sometimes experience this when we receive a new assignment. It can take us to a place we've never been, with people we've never lived with before, a culture that is not the one we grew up in. And that can be challenging. On a natural level, that can be very challenging. But in a spirit of faith, we know God is calling us to be there. And hopefully, our relationship with Him helps us to find Him in the days, in the hours, in the minutes, in the encounters that we experience, so that we find Him in that place with us, and that brings us peace and joy. But it's not just us, but every believer is called to live in this spirit of humble and filial abandonment. Because as we face different things in our lives, the first question that can often pop into our heads is, okay, what do I want to do with this? What's the path I want to take forward? And what we need to be asking as believers is, what is God seeking to reveal to me in this? And what is the path forward that He is showing to me, so that we can enter into that, not just for our own lives, but for our place within this beautiful world that He's created, and learn to help foster His design of love for ourselves and for all of creation.
Thank you so much, Mother Julie. I love that thought. What is God asking of me? What is He seeking to reveal to me here? And what is the path forward that He is showing me? And so all of us as Christians have an obligation to take care of creation, of our sisters and brothers in the human community and all of creation seriously. And many of the young people out there today have a sincere desire to live simply and to care for the earth, and may not even realize how consistent this is with the evangelical counsels that are lived in the vowed life. So again, this is God Calling, Vocation Vibes, Conversations with the Little Sisters of the Poor. Our contact information, if you have comments or questions, is LSPUSA-Podcast@gmail.com, LSPUSA-Podcast@gmail.com. And if you are a young woman seeking accompaniment in your discernment of your vocation, feel free to get in contact with us. And please be assured that Mother Julie and I and all of our little sisters and our residents whom we serve around the world join in prayer for you and your intentions and your personal journey with Jesus.